Now, moving on, friends, to one of those important matters that we can take into consideration at this point of time and get into understanding an overview of the Constitution of India uh, before we probably take each of the 12 and more than that, actually, the salient features that are in the Constitution. Um, I think having an overall picture before getting into the details of the picture becomes critical and important. The Indian Constitution, as we know, is a very, quite a bulky document, and to understanding that will be the primary basis of understanding public administration and public policy in India. So, the Constitution, as the foundation, lays down the pillars of a democratic society and the pillars of public policy and public administration. And hence, taking a bird's eye view right now at this stage of the course will be very important. So, salient features of the Constitution uh, actually, are important for us to understand, because I believe that the Indian Constitution is quite unique in its content, and we will probably talk about some of the uniqueness, because I think we have customized it to a larger extent, and it actually resonates the spirit of the people of India to an extent. And as we know that India, that is Bharat, uh, you know, was actually a place which was earlier dominated by only Hindus, who were actually on the other side of the Indus River, or the Sindh River, or the side of the Sindh. And later on, we had invasion from the Mughals, and then we had colonization from the Britishers. And now this country did occupy so many different kinds of communities that became part of this nation. And I think it's important that while we have made the constitution keeping history as the basis, because remember, friends, what has happened in history, be it for the European Union or the continent due to the world wars, and what happened to India due to colonization and invasion, are critical lessons to be learned. And hence, the Constitution actually draws a lot of these values and systems from the historical evolution, as we would want to call it. Now, has the Indian Constitution changed from what it was as originally adopted in 1949? Lot of authors and jurists would say that yes, the Indian Constitution has come about a change. And you notice that what was there as the original Constitution probably does not remain so, is what some authors would like to believe. But to be honest and fair to the Constitution, I think a large part of the original Constitution still continues to remain the same, despite kind of a mini amendment of the Constitution came about in the year 1976, thanks to what we call as the 42nd Amendment to the Constitution. The 42nd Amendment itself was called as the mini Constitution because it was so huge that it was like one small constitution on its own. Now, what drew the 42nd Amendment of 1976 is all that we know is, I think, one of the most important, turn of events in the constitutional history of India, where Mrs. Indira Gandhi had to impose emergency on the country, and that a lot of historians and jurists of that time have written was actually some kind of an abuse of the constitutional power, and hence I think it was important for the country and also the parliament to evaluate that such a kind of incident of an imposition of emergency does not happen again. And hence, I think the 42nd Amendment in 1976 largely brought in some kind of checks and balances on government. And I think to that extent, it made the Constitution a much better document. So I think the original Constitution, as it were, continues to remain the same, but I think the 42nd Amendment refined it And I'm sure every other amendment which has happened to the Constitution, which are more than 100 amendments that have taken place, have only made the Constitution a better working document. And I think improvement of any law is very important for social transformation. And I think Constitution is also one such document that needs to undergo the change. And obviously, once you read Article 368 of the Constitution, you will realize that the original Constitution did provide for amendment to the Constitution. This is part of the Constitution. This was something that was accepted. That the Constitution, once adopted, is only the base document, but the changes to the Constitution will be inevitable, and hence amendment process is something that has to be undertaken from time to time. So yes, we would consider that post 1976 there has been a substantial change to the Constitution itself, and hence what could be taken as the 12 main features of the Indian Constitution. Briefly, I think people can add a few to the features of the Constitution, can deduct a few, but for our course, I think these are the 12 features of the Constitution. The first and the foremost, friends, is that this Constitution of India happens to be probably the lengthiest written constitution. Unwritten constitutions can be far more lengthier if you prescribe it in terms of the nature of documents that have to be collated as what is the Constitution. Now, the Indian Constitution is the lengthiest written constitution of the world, and there are several reasons why it is considered to be so lengthy. And of course, one can definitely state that constitutions have to be comprehensive. There is no problem if the Constitution is elaborate and a detailed document. This only strengthens the Constitution. This is what one would like to believe. However, on the other side, the pitfall of a lengthy Constitution is it results in a lot of varied kind of interpretation. Probably studying the Constitution itself becomes a tough task. For example, in many of the law schools, where Constitution is a subject or a core paper or a core subject, it cannot be taught in one semester. So it is divided into Constitutional Law 1 and Constitutional Law 2. Despite having two core courses on Constitution, I still believe that it's not sufficient, because this is such a wonderful document. This is such an historical evolutionary character. It is so dynamic and vibrant that there are so many things that can be actually discussed under this paper. So I think analyzing and evaluating this lengthy document has its own challenges, as one would like to take it into consideration. So currently, friends, as we speak, this Constitution has around 470 articles, and it is actually divided into 25 parts, and it has 12 schedules. So 470 articles, 25 parts, and 12 schedules. But if you notice that when the Constitution was originally taken into consideration, we just had 395 articles, and there were only 22 parts. So 3 parts were additionally brought into existence, and there are only 8 schedules. So I think we added 4 schedules, we added 3 parts, and roughly I think we have added around 75 new articles to the Constitution, and that clearly has extended the length of the Constitution from what it was originally. Now, of course, I think there are many factors which can justify such a long Constitution. And among those factors, I believe that the vastness of the country, the diversity of the population and its culture, and the geographical factors. Please note what we have is the Himalayan, mountain ranges to the Western Ghats to the northeast, to the Eastern Ghats, to the coast, which is around 7,500 kilometers, to the Thar Desert. I think everything is a very interesting, geographical diversity that we have in this nation. So it snows in India. It's India faces a lot of cyclones and even including so many tsunamis that we have suffered. We have a kind of a good, we have few good neighbors. I can just name probably Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, but we have some challenging neighbors like China and Pakistan, which also probably is something that the constitution has to probably draw and take some kind of issues from. So I think one should agree that the constitution is not a regular legislation, and hence a constitutional document uh, for one that India requires has to take all these diversity of issues and challenges into consideration. For example, I can just give you one instance. The seven sister states in the Northeast have posed a lot of challenges about the way in which the Northeast should be governed, because they have their very unique way of autonomous councils to govern, and hence protecting the identity of people from the Northeast, giving them that kind of separation in terms of keeping intact those kinds of governance structures, probably was something that the constitution had to envisage. So that has to be also taken due note and consideration for. The second salient feature for us to consider is, I think to a larger extent, you will notice that we have drawn the constitution from various sources, which I think is entirely not a bad idea, but it's a one of the features is that I think the best from the world, and I think there has been a lot of detailed study on which part of which constitution has to be taken into consideration. So I think over there, drawing from say USSR, France, or a South African or a Japanese constitution, I think is a very important comparative lesson that we had undertaken in bringing the salient feature of our constitution. So I think we have the best of the world, and we have actually evaluated what has happened across in terms of drafting of a constitution. But one must appreciate this, that apart from what we have already discussed about which kind of constitution has given what provision to the Indian constitution, let's not forget the Indian constitution still is a basic document from the Government of India Act of 1935. So, so that has been the core part of the constitution, the Government of India Act of 1935. That's the core. And what has happened on the periphery of that core has been drawn from the lessons across the world. Third, of course, the Constitution is a very important document which has flexibility in terms of amendment. But you will notice that there is a blend between what is to be kept as rigid, which are uncompromisable, something that you cannot change. So you will notice that amendment to a constitution is not like amending a regular legislation. So even if you say, oh sir, there is an amendment provision, so I think it's entirely flexible, is probably not the right way of judging it. See, amending a regular law and amending a constitution, the process is entirely different. So amending the constitution definitely requires a lot of procedural aspects. Sometimes you will notice that it would require consent of the states. It requires a 2/3 majority in each house, and so on and so forth. So I think a special majority is something that is always relevant for a constitutional amendment to come into place. So it's not easy. So that ensures an element of rigidity if required, and I think that clearly shows the blend that the constitutional framers wanted to get. Of course, the federal system. India is considered as a quasi-federal country. Quasi-federal means it's not entirely federal. It is the states that have a power. That's also a very interesting, unique feature, that the states are independent in its own territories of legislative dominance. And I think what is important is that the process in India of public administration between the center and the state is known as cooperative federalism, which means I think the state and the center cooperate to fulfill the visions of the constitution to take the country forward. And the best method is the method of cooperative federalism, in terms of the fact that you're not talking of competing federalisms. So the state and the center are not competing for investments and so on and so forth. They cooperate so that I think finally the welfare of the citizens can be achieved. Parliamentary form of government, I think the Westminster model is also another feature of the Constitution of India, because we had a choice. For example, I did mention in the past that India did borrow a few of what was there in the American Constitution. Now, the American Constitution, especially at the federal level and even at the place of the states, is a model of the presidential form of government. Now, India did not opt for the presidential form of government. I think we opted for the parliamentary form of government. So I think these are broadly the two forms of government across the world: parliamentary form of government as against the presidential form of government. Now there are plus and minuses in both these two forms of government, and I think the constituent assembly debates can be something that one can rely on to understand how and why did we actually choose the parliamentary form of government. Maybe sometime at the fact that when we take the basic structure doctrine, a lot of us may have to decide whether the parliamentary form of government is the basic structure of the constitution, or can we bring about an amendment to change this from parliamentary to presidential form of government. So we'll probably take that up. It is too early for us to even consider that, but I'm just telling you, the parliamentary form of government is one of those most essential features of our constitution, and this was mainly borrowed from the United Kingdom. And the president is generally a nominal and a real executive in India, as against a proper executive in the United States. The President of the United States is also the Chief of the Armed Forces. The President in India is also the Chief of the Armed Forces, but he's a nominal chief, not the real chief. Now, what happens is, in the parliamentary form of government, friends, please note the party that forms the government is generally a party that has a majority, that it can prove in the floor of the House, and it then nominates its leader, who will be then called as the Prime Minister or the Chief Minister. But what is also important in the parliamentary form of government is to understand that though the majority party elects its leader, they also form a cabinet. Now, the cabinet is supposed to be the collective body responsible for running the government. Please note it down. That's precisely what you would expect post-emergency. That though you have the Prime Minister, who is supposed to have the real executive power, the Prime Minister shall only work on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So what does this do is that it brings about collective leadership. It brings about, probably a greater degree of accountability and transparency. And of course, it will check abuse of power, or it will also help limit the power in terms of concentration in the hands of just one individual. So I think these were probably some of those very interesting ideas in making a suggestion that India should have the parliamentary form of government. And of course, the parliamentarians are elected representatives. Please note, we have a bicameral system of a parliament in the central government. It's not necessarily in every state that we have that. And you have a lower house, which has the direct representative of the people. And you have an upper house, which is the indirect representative of the people. So the lower house is called the Lok Sabha, and the upper house is called the Rajya Sabha. I think the entire parliamentary form of government, I think, has been borrowed from the UK, where we have the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And I think we did find that to be a very suitable model for India to be brought into existence. What is important is that once the Prime Minister has been given the oath to head the government, he becomes the Prime Minister of the country. So he's the leader of the party, but he becomes the Prime Minister of the country. And he will have the prerogative to appoint his Council of Ministers. Of course, the Council of Ministers can be of cabinet rank, state rank, or of independent rank, and that depends upon how the Parliament, holds these kinds of ministers accountable in terms of the debate or in terms of the legislations that are actually being made. The next feature of the Indian Constitution is parliamentary sovereignty and judicial supremacy. Please note, in India, when I say parliamentary sovereignty, it does not mean that the parliament is sovereign. I think the people are sovereign. But here, the word sovereignty very clearly means that the parliament is supreme in making legislations and law. And I think whatever is made by the parliament is the law of the land. So, unless the parliament has authorized any other agency of the government, no one can make actually law without the consent, approval, authority of the parliament. In that sense, I think the sovereignty of making laws is entirely vested with the parliament. The parliament is supreme, it is sovereign, it represents the wish and will of the people, and what the parliament says shall be the law of the land. So that kind of a process is very clearly there in the Indian Constitution. Of course, I think awfully judicial review has been so supreme that it has been able to check the legislature and the executive. It has been able to hold these two other organs of the government accountable. And I think for democracy to survive, thrive, and progress, democracy to survive, thrive, and progress, judicial supremacy, according to me, is core and important. And I think the Constitution did realize that the Supreme Court and the High Courts, which are called as constitutional courts, must have an upper hand in determining the final word of interpretation in the Constitution. So please note, what does one word, one sentence, one article mean in the Constitution? That supremacy call is only with the judiciary. So the judiciary is the custodian of the Constitution. Judiciary is the watchdog of the constitutional agencies. Judiciary is the final word on interpretation of what the Constitution should mean and what the Constitution should look like. So to that extent, I think judicial supremacy, which probably is something that is drawn from the American model. Look, parliamentary sovereignty is borrowed from the British model. Judicial supremacy is borrowed from the US model. But that is the power of the Indian Constitution. I think we got so much importance in terms of what this Constitution looks like just by trying to understand which are the best and the salient features of this Constitution. Fundamental rights, yes, they are also an important feature, because I think right now we have made a distinction between fundamental rights of the Constitution and other rights, right? So that is also an important aspect. And you will notice that Part 3 of the Constitution speaks about fundamental rights. We have right to equality, we have certain freedoms, we have right against exploitation, religion freedom, educational rights for certain institutions, and then we have constitutional remedies as well. So the fundamental rights are something that we will take up in detail. There is something called the Directive Principles of State Policy, DPSC, as well. That is part of the Constitution. We have fundamental duties as well. Interestingly, these were, in Part 4A of the Constitution, you will find fundamental duties. So there is a duty to respect the national flag, the national anthem, protect the sovereignty and unity and integrity of the country. So to promote the spirit of common brotherhood among the people, preserve rich heritage of all composite cultures, and so on and so forth. All these are also part of the Constitution. So it's not about rights, it is also about the duties. The next interesting feature of the Constitution is secular state. Again, something that you have to know, that secular word was not there as a part of the original Constitution. It was brought about by the mini amendment or the mini Constitution that happened, not mini amendment, sorry, we will say major amendment bringing in the mini Constitution in 1976. Now, about secular, I think there has to be a lot of debate. We have to probably take into consideration a lot of aspects in trying to define what this secular actually means. It may mean many things. But if one just has to, at a glance, look at the secular character of the Indian state, right? This is what we said, that the state does not have a religion of its own. The state is secular, but communities and citizens can have their own religious practices. State will not. So we are not an Islamic state, we are not a Hindu state, we are not a Christian state. We are just a secular state. The state has the duty to treat every religion equally. So you will notice that the word secular is used in the preamble of the Constitution. But if you want to track and trace secular obligations of the Constitution, you can definitely trace it to Article 14, which talks about equality. The state should treat everyone equal, be it citizens or institutions, and you cannot delay or deny equal protection of law to any religious institution, community, be it major community or major communities with having majority, or communities that are so-called minority communities. Article 15 also talks about the fact that the state shall not discriminate on the ground of race, sex, and religion. So Article 15 also very clearly mandates and puts an obligation on state not to discriminate on the basis of religion. That clearly states a secular principle. So please know, while the word secular came in 1976, 14 and 15 were already part of the original constitution. So secularism was something probably intended to but not used by the Constituent Assembly. Look at Article 16. Equal opportunity for all citizens in matter of public employment. So you cannot give preference to only one religion, one community, so on and so forth. Article 25, which talks about every person has the equal entitlement to the freedom of conscience, the right to practice, profess, and propagate any religion. That is also every person's right. So if you go and further read 26, 27, and 28 article, and including 29, you notice that to a larger extent, secular and secularism is a very important bedrock of the Indian Constitution. Minorities can have the right to run their own educational institution. This is provided in Article 30, which means that the state will encourage minority institutions to get into the business practice of education, and they can continue to seek protection under the Constitution. So not only major but even minority communities have the right and ability to do the same. Finally, I think Article 44 of the Constitution, which mandates the state to kind of endeavor to bring in a uniform civil code. I think that also to a larger extent puts in the element of secularism as the directive principle of state policy. However, one will have to clearly appreciate and understand that secularism or a secular state in a Western concept and secularism under the Indian Constitution can actually be quite different, right? For example, in the West, when secular or secularism was being advocated, it meant very clearly that there has to be a separation from the church vis-a-vis the state. This was very important, and actually this is also very important for us to understand, because in the West, the state and the church were actually together, and what the church said was actually the law of the land. And hence, when they said that, look, the state must not necessarily be a spokesman of the church, and it should not just promulgate every law that the church wants it to do, that is when the concept of secularism was introduced to distinguish the politics of the state to the politics of the church. But please note, in India, we are not looking at secularism from this aspect. For us, secularism is a very positive concept. Okay. Now, let me tell you the difference. Why I'm using the word positive, because in the West it was used as a negative concept. Why was it negative? Because you wanted to split the church from the state. So it was negatively inferred or brought in and applied. So keep the church different from the state. Let the state be neutral. Let the state be equal. Let the state be transparent. And religion or religious law or what we would call as canon law is not necessarily something that the state has to adopt. So let the state, embrace all religion, all communities, and all people, whether they are part of the church or members of the church or not. But in India, I think secularism is positive because we believe in secularism. We want to provide equal opportunity to people from all religions, right? So secularism and religion or religious-based rights are not necessarily one and the same. Okay, so in India, I think what we are saying is preference to one religion by the state is something that is not permitted. Okay, so if someone wants to see what it means, so here we are talking of a very positive aspect of secularism, where the state has to treat every religion, every religious community equally in all matters of public administration, and that's what is the positive element of secularism. And I believe that in India, taking the step forward on secularism, I think we have done a very systematic and significant, contribution positively in terms of treatment of scheduled tribes and scheduled castes. Very often they're not, you're not ascribing them with any special religion, which is the major religion in the state. But I think fairly treating these marginalized communities and giving them constitutional status, I think the state has acted quite secularly. So tribes have been given their dues, the scheduled castes have been given their dues. So the state is not only a state that represents the majoritarian views or ideas or concerns and challenges, but I think it represents every person from every walk of the society. The ninth salient feature is the universal adult franchise. You will notice that in India, you can vote if you're above 18 years of age. This right to vote for a person above 18 years was introduced in 1989 through the 61st Constitutional Amendment. Till 1989, the age was 21. That's all. Okay. So I think the kind of broad-based democratic process in India is actually one of the biggest processes in the world. Please note, one in terms of population, second in terms of the kind of technology that is being used in voting right now. So you have a very powerful autonomous body called the Election Commission of India, which is a constitutional body. One should not forget that same. And their performance has been one of the most unique features of the Indian Constitution. And I think the self-respect of a citizen and a common man is upheld when the democratic process of elections do take place for either the central government or to the Lok Sabha, as we call it, to the state election and assembly, and also to the local governments, as the case may be. So I think the representation of people and their ability to decide the governance model is something of a great unique feature of the Indian Constitution. So democracy has been protected always. Emergency provision, I think Article 352, Article 365 and Article 360. We will probably go in greater detail. But I think emergency power is also one of the most unique features of the Constitution, because to a larger extent one may safely say that thanks to the emergency power, which have been abused and misused, we'll probably take up all the cases regarding even that. But as of now, the single most credit that I would give for the unity of the nation is the emergency power. It has been, this one power which is there in 352, 365 and 360 has been able to keep the states binded with the union and the federal government. And I don't think we have allowed any state to actually secede from the union, which is not possible under the Constitution at all. There is no provision for states to secede or leave the union. That includes the state of Jammu and Kashmir, which was annexed to India with the special provision in Article 370. So I think you will notice that we have three kinds of emergency. First is a national emergency that can be imposed on the ground of war or external aggression or armed rebellion. That is under Article 352. Second, we have a state emergency that can be imposed under 365, where the states fail to follow the directions of the central government. But what is critical is about Article 356, which is the imposition of a state emergency by imposing what we know as the President's Rule. So, the failure of a constitutional machinery in the state, the central government can actually dismiss the state government and impose the central rule. That is called the state emergency. The final emergency is called financial emergency. If there is financial instability or the credit in India, like countries like Pakistan and Sri Lanka are currently facing, then in those circumstances, the financial emergency can also be imposed in this country. So I think this is a very unique feature of the Indian Constitution. It has been very effective in keeping a total control of the central government, despite the different conflicts that each state has been able to, defend. Like, for example, we have Maoism and Naxalism in certain parts of the country. We have, at one point of time, the Northeast, even now, sometimes have this militants or militia. So I think the emergency powers has been the basis of protecting the unity, integrity, and sovereignty of the nation. And I believe that while the emergency provisions have to be used in extraordinary circumstances, legitimate circumstances, and it should not have a political undertone to it, this has been a very, very important element for governance of the Constitution itself. The 11th salient feature is single citizenship, and the 12th is cooperative society. I think each of these we will take up in detail, but just on the single citizenship, in India we don't have states being able to grant you any kind of citizenship. So the Citizenship Act of 1955 will be something that we will deal with in greater detail. And what this does is that through the single citizenship, you will be able to owe allegiance to one nation and one country, and that brings about a very patriotic flavor to how the Indian Constitution will be actually taken into. Cooperative society is again one important aspect of the Constitution. This is where probably for the first time you notice, apart from the above 11 features of governance and public administration, we decided that public administration will be into some kind of model of production of goods and services, which is bringing the state into the practice of business. And we believed that a constitutional intervention would be required to promote cooperative societies. And this was brought about by the 97th Constitutional Amendment of 2011. And we said that the cooperative societies must get a constitutional protection, a constitutional status. And what this does right now is, please note, under Article 19, one will have the right to form a cooperative. Because Article 19(1)(g) gives you the freedom of trade, occupation, and business, among which cooperatives can be one such model of that kind of a business. Two, I think right now you will notice when you read Article 43(b), the state government is supposed to, promote cooperatives. It could be milk cooperative, it could be any other farmers cooperative, and the cooperative model is actually a model that is a win-win situation for the members of the cooperative who are part of the producers and part of the community. So it is a kind of an empowering legislation where the state intervenes, the state promotes the cooperative model, and the cooperative model has a very socialistic undertone to it, but it is an empowering, kind of a measure. And I think the Constitution uniquely even speaks about this kind of production of goods and services, and the cooperative model is brought into place. Usually, cooperatives are regulated under the state legislature. Please note it down, because that is what is the division of subjects. However, you notice the central government has come up with an interesting law called the Multi-State Cooperative Societies Act. So, a cooperative earlier was confined only to a state because it was registered under that kind of state. And what was changed in 2011 is that the Parliament did recognize that the cooperatives are of national importance. They should go beyond the state, They should be able to do business in an integrated manner on a national basis, and they could probably register under the Multi-State Cooperatives Act, and the state government will not object to it, and the central government will start probably regulating the multi-state cooperatives. So, for that purpose, I think the cooperative societies feature in the constitution was actually added. So, I think getting a brief overview of the salient features of the constitution definitely helps us understand the kind of a structure of what this constitution looks like, and I'm sure as we go forward, we will take each of these provisions in a greater detail as well.